Care for the poor was a distinctive part of the early church. They took care of orphans and really especially abandoned babies. I think I mentioned this before, but people not having the means to butcher babies in the womb would wait until the babies were born and then just leave them out in the sun to die on their own. And it was Christians who would come and pick those babies up and find homes for them and care for these babies. So Christians have been from the beginning pro-life and felt like that was an important part of Christ's teaching. They would adopt them and nurture them. They tended to the sick and elderly, and whenever there was a plague that sprung up anywhere, especially in history recorded in Caesarea, while everyone was trying to flee to the countryside to escape the plague, it was the Christians who were rushing in and were in a way trading their life for those who were sick. By caring for the sick and giving them life, they themselves would get sick and die. And it was Christians who were known, again, by historians, pagan and otherwise, to be people who cared for the sick and the poor. That was part of our understanding as Christians of the two great commands: to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. Part of a quote here: in the 2nd century, Ignatius of Antioch characterized heretics as those who, quote, have no regard for love, no care for the widow or the orphan or the oppressed, of the bond or of the free or of the hungry or of the thirsty, unquote. So again, that's always been a part of who Christians are. Markedly, they are people who care for the poor. So we're asking the question over the last 3 weeks, what can we do for the poor? We believe that we still have an obligation to the poor. We still have an obligation to those who are needy. And we have defined poor as those who are unable to meet their own needs. We understand, however, the unique challenges that we face living in a first world society. Really one of the first, and at this point, we're not that we're the only first world country, but we're living in the wealthiest and best off country in history. And so it's harder for us to find needs. We have to go a long, long way, really, before we find needs not being met. We're living in a place that has been constructed around Judeo-Christian tenets like no other place in history has. Meaning this, that in American law, there's protection for injustice, that whether you're poor or you're wealthy, you have resources, and the government is not allowed to oppress you. We have equal opportunity for jobs. We don't have enslavement. We have a representative government where everybody, rich or poor, gets one vote. And so we're living, again, in a society constructed by Judeo-Christian ethics that try to elevate the equality of man, whereas you don't have that in every society. And when the first century Christians were ministering in their time, it definitely was not that way. And so how do we, as 21st century American Christians, do the same thing that first century Christians were doing in their context and time? And that's not an easy question to answer all the time. This series has tackled then 3 points. The first point is the existence of the poor, the fact that the Bible talks about that there are poor in the world. The second is the obligation to the poor. And the third then tonight is the church and the poor. We said in the first week with the existence of the poor that the definition of poor is those who have needs that they cannot meet on their own. And we also said that the Bible acknowledges the existence of poor people to the point where Jesus even said, the poor you will have with you always. And so we are living in a world where unfortunately there are going to be poor people, and that gives us a chance to be able to meet needs. The causes, we talked about this, of poverty are, some of the causes of poverty are these: a lack of access to food, a lack of access to housing, a lack of access to good work or jobs, a lack of access to health care. There are also personal causes. Sometimes it's by tragedy, sometimes it's by victimhood, and it can even be by sloth. Some people are in poverty because of all those reasons, or maybe just a few of them. We also acknowledge that there's a sliding scale of need. When we say Are your needs being met? We understand that everybody has a different definition of what that means, and there are people who are saying this is a human right. For instance, those on the left say, as pro-choice people, that abortion is a human right. It's a need. Well, we would fundamentally disagree with that. I mentioned in the first week that somebody said that air conditioning is a human right. Well, I think it's very careful to be careful. I think it's good to be careful about what we mean when we say needs. And there are needs that everybody has, and there are needs that we can meet. And just because someone says this is a need doesn't mean we have to meet it, but it's good for us as Christians to think, what is a need in our society? Again, like I prayed, not so that we could get out of doing good, but so that we could do good. Last week, then, we talked about our obligation to the poor, and we looked at what is the government's job, or what is society's obligation to the poor. And we talked about the Old Testament, and the principles that were laid down in Old Testament Israel were these: that you could not make the poor victims of poor judgment. You could not oppress them just because they were poor before the judgment seat. You couldn't charge them interest. You couldn't sell them into slavery, and you couldn't oppress them by keeping an important pledge. We also said, that was the negative. On the positive, that they were to provide for them by leaving them crops to go and get, allowing for a lesser sacrifice. When they went into the temple, the poor were provided for by being able to bring a lesser sacrifice than that which was required, and also canceling debts after 50 years. Those were the provisions in the Old Testament and the obligations to the poor. So now we're going to look at the church and the poor and ask the question, what should then our attitude be toward the poor, and what can we do? Now, I'll get to this at the end of the message, but I had Terry pass out to you what we use when people call the church. People call the church, do you guys, and I never get a name. It's never, hi, my name's Mike, and I live here in Park Rapids. I have some needs, and I'm wondering if you could help. It's, as soon as I answer the phone, hi, do you guys help people? I'm like, so I've said, well, yeah, we do. It depends on what the needs are, but tell me a little bit of your story. And then they start to talk, if they can, a little bit. Well, I had this thing, and I need some gas, or I have this thing, and they're going to cut off my electricity. I say, okay, great. Can you come to the church and fill out an application so that we can look at it and try to determine what, if anything, we can do to help you? That's generally my line. And you'd be surprised how many people don't even come to fill out an application. If somebody comes in to fill out an application, that's a first step of, okay, they're doing something. That's good. So what I've given you tonight is the application that we use. It needs maybe some help. It needs maybe some adjustment. And so if you have suggestions for that, or if some of you would like to form a team and tackle that, and even tackle the whole idea of benevolence, that would be wonderful. But I wanted to at least give you something to look at and to chew on and to think about. All right, so let me give you some principles that I found in studying this idea of poverty, even in the New Testament. And these are just, again, if you take the big pool of thought in the New Testament and what the Bible says, not taking my own agenda, but if you look at every instance of the poor and what the Bible says about it, what's the picture that emerges? There are several foci that come in to play here. And the first is the focus on the Christian poor. Now, the New Testament church, again, knew of poverty. But when you look at where the resources are directed in the New Testament church, it was often, if not exclusively, focused on the church itself, helping other church members. In Acts chapter 2, verses 44 and 45, all that believed were together and had all things common, and sold their possessions and goods, and parted them to all men as every man had need. Now, it does say all men, but in the context, I believe it's talking about all men who were having all things common. If you were included in the group of what is called the church, then you were part of the people whose needs were being met. Here in Acts chapter 4, verse 32 says this, "And the multitude of them that believed were of one heart and of one soul. Neither said any of them that aught of the things which he possessed was his own, but they had all things common. And with great power gave the apostles witness of the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and great grace was upon them all. Neither was there any among them that lacked, for as many as were possessors of lands or houses sold them, and brought the prices of the things that were sold, and laid them down at the apostles' feet, and distribution was made unto every man according as he had need." Now again, I'm making an assumption there, but all things common meant that if you were in the group, that you could be a recipient of those needs. And then the apostles were there to help dole out what the need was. A need would come to them and they would say, "Oh, we have to meet this need." In Acts chapter 6, we see that there was a need that wasn't being met. The Grecian widows were being neglected. And so they said, can we form a group of people who will not only have oversight over this, but will be the executor of this as well? And so they picked out the deacons. The word deacon means those who serve tables. And so they were meant to go and take care of the Grecian widows. But it was, again, not just Grecian widows like in Corinth, Grecian widows that were there, because those people were going to meet the needs. Go over to Acts chapter 11. Acts 11, at the end of the chapter, it says in verse 28, "And there stood up one of them, one of the prophets, named Agabus, and signified by the Spirit that there should be great dearth throughout all the world, which came to pass in the days of Claudius Caesar. Then the disciples, every man according to his ability, determined to send relief unto the brethren which dwelt in Judea, which also they did, and sent it to the elders by the hands of Barnabas and Saul." Again, they took a collection and they said, let's send relief to help these people that are in famine in Judea. What kind of people were they? Well, it said brethren. Now, we could say, well, he's talking about the Jewish people, and that may well be. But what I see in the examples in Scripture, 3 times that I told you, it is in the context of the church, or helping Christians helping other Christians with their needs. We also see this in the example of churches. Go to 1 Corinthians chapter 16. 1 Corinthians chapter 16. Verse 1, "Now concerning the collection for the saints, as I have given orders to the churches of Galatia, even so do ye. Upon the first day of the week, let every one of you lay by him in store, as God hath prospered him, that there be no gatherings when I come. And when I come, whomsoever ye shall approve by your letters, them will I send to bring your liberality unto Jerusalem." Again, this was a collection that they said they're going to make for the saints who are at Jerusalem, for other Christians, and Paul was going to take it himself to Jerusalem so that the needs of other saints there could be met. 2 Corinthians, we're going just kind of in order. 2 Corinthians 8. Verse 1, "Moreover, brethren, we do you to wit of the grace of God bestowed upon the churches of Macedonia, how that in a great trial of affliction, the abundance of their joy and their deep poverty abounded unto the riches of their liberality. For to their power I bear record, yea, and beyond their power they were willing of themselves, praying us or asking us, begging us with much entreaty that we would receive the gift and take upon us the fellowship of the ministering to the saints." The Macedonian churches, they were all ready to give. They heard that there was a need of the saints in Jerusalem, and they said, we're going to take up a collection. And the church in Corinth said, well, we are too. And so Paul already got the collection from the churches in Macedonia, who according to this passage were poor and yet gave anyway because they were in need. But they said, but the people in Jerusalem, we owe them so much of sending the gospel. We want the work to go forth. The Christians there are struggling, so we're going to take up a collection to meet the needs there. And Paul's saying, I'm coming through, Corinthians. Can I count on you as well to keep your promise about what you freely pledged to give? Now, again, this was not just missional. Like, it wasn't just that they were saying, oh, hey, there's a paper factory, and if we can get money to them, they will print tracts and Bibles, and we can distribute that. There's nothing wrong with that at all. That's just not what was going on. They were going to meet the needs of Christians who were living in Jerusalem, who could not, for whatever reason, maybe because the persecution was so hot in Jerusalem, probably because there was this famine. For whatever reason, there was a need there in Jerusalem, and the other churches in the outlying areas said, let's give of ourselves to make sure that these Christians' needs are being met. So the focus is on the Christian poor first. Our first obligation then is to those who are within our midst. Now let's go to 1 Timothy chapter 5. Verse 3 says, so 1 Timothy 5, verse 3, honor widows that are widows indeed. All right, so now it says honor widows. Now that could be honor them with a place of prominence, but James talks about that we don't really put a place of prominence. It could mean honor their opinion, but I think in the context of the passage is talking about honoring them by supporting them financially, and I'll bear that out here. So he says, first of all right, so he's writing to Timothy. Timothy, you're the pastor of the church at Ephesus. It's important for you to honor widows, to help the needy widows that are in your church, but with some caveats. Notice in verse number 4, but if any widow have children or nephews, let them learn first to show piety at home and to requite their parents, for that is good and acceptable before God. Look at verse 8. But if any provide not for his own, and specially for those of his own house, he hath denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. Look at verse number 16. If any man or woman that believeth have widows, let them relieve them, and let not the church be charged, that it may relieve them that are widows indeed. Okay, so here's the thing. There are needy widows in the church all over, right? But some of these widows over here have children, and some of them have nephews. And there's not enough money maybe to go around to help and support all the widows. And so Paul tells Timothy, so the widows in the church that have sons and daughters, hey, you sons and daughters, you ought to take care of your mom. And hey, your aunt, she never married, but you could take care of her. And that way, the money that we have, we can support these widows over here. So the church is interested in supporting the needs, but it says, but we're going to ask you to take care of the needs that you're obligated to first of all. So you have someone that can take care of you, someone that can meet your needs. Don't ask the church to do that. Again, why? Not just so we can keep our money, not that we can keep that, so that we can meet the needs of other widows in the church. So we want this to be as fair as possible. We want to meet as many needs as possible. But not only that, he says in verse number 16, that it may relieve them that are widows indeed. Now, that idea of widows indeed is, again, someone who doesn't have anybody to take care of them. But it's not just that as either, because there were other caveats or other obligations to see who would be worthy of getting help from the church. Verse number 5. Now, she that is a widow indeed and desolate trusteth in God and continueth in supplications and prayers night and day. Verse number 9. Let not a widow be taken into the number under 80 years old, having been the wife of one man, well reported of for good works, if she have brought up children, if she have lodged strangers, if she have washed the saints' feet, if she have relieved the afflicted, if she diligently followed every good work. But the younger widows refuse, for when they have begun to wax wanton against Christ, they will marry. Now, I'm not going to go into all of that, but what I want to say is this. He says, all right, if there's a widow that's younger than, what does he say, 60 years old, younger than 60, let her get remarried again, if she can. But for those women that are older, 60 or older, and they have been a blessing to the church, what are some of the things they've done? They've done good works. They've lodged strangers. You know, someone's coming through. Apollos is coming through. I just got a letter from him. He's going to be here in 2 weeks. We need a place for them to stay. And a widow lady says, well, I don't have a very big house, but he's welcome to stay with me. I would love to show him hospitality. And the church is looking and saying, boy, I don't know. We couldn't ask you to put, nope, I've got a little bit of money I've been saving up, and I'm going to go get a really nice meal for Apollos when he comes. God bless you. That's great. Okay. All right, good. We'll do that. She's lodged strangers. She's washed the saints' feet. She's relieved the afflicted. She's diligently followed every good work. She's someone who's known for prayer. Paul says to Timothy, boy, you better take care of her. Especially those widows that have been helping the church and a real blessing. Make sure that you take care of those ladies. Again, from this then we learn that church is able to select those that they can care for. It's okay to be discriminate, right? We don't just have a little button outside and we load it with $100 bills, and if somebody has a need, they just press the green button and a $100 bill spits out, and they press it again and press it again and press it again. And well, this is great, right? Some people act like that's the way the church should be. Well, you're the church, you got all that money. What you got all that money for? You're not going to help people. Well, no, we are going to help people, but it's okay to be discerning too, to say, there are needs, but it's not just are there needs, but is there someone who can meet that need? And have they done something so that we are investing back in someone who invested in the church? Again, we're not saying that we can't take care of others. I'm only saying that the emphasis in the New Testament, you don't see any commands in Paul's epistles to say, take care of the poor that are outside the church. Now, historically, churches did that. What I'm saying is we're looking at the commands of Scripture. What did Paul say to churches when he's writing to churches? His command was, hey, take care of other Christians first. Take care of other Christians. We're also told to support those who are in prison and go to meet the needs. Paul thanked Philippians for their gift to him, brought by Epaphroditus. Hebrews 10, verse 34, the writer says, ye had compassion of me and my bonds, and took joyfully the spoiling of your goods, knowing in yourselves that ye have in heaven a better and more enduring substance. Now, why is it that the church's emphasis is on helping the poor who are already a part of the church? Why? Because we are members one of another. Because those of us in the body of Christ, it's important for us to take care of each other. 1 John 3:17, whoso hath this world's good and seeth his brother have need, and shutteth up his bowels of compassion from him, how dwelleth the love of God in him? James 2, verses 15 and 16, if a brother or a sister be naked and destitute of daily food, and one of you say unto them, depart in peace, be ye warmed and filled, notwithstanding ye give them not those things which are needful to the body, what doth it profit? When we know our place in society and in culture, it brings fulfillment. Unfortunately, the government and our culture is tearing that sense of purpose down. So there used to be a time when children understood that they take care of their parents. And I think that's biblical. and a day when nephews and nieces understood it was their obligation to take care of family. And a time when a church said, these are the kind of people we're going to take care of. And all of those roles and obligations have gone, and like I said last week, have largely been replaced by this juggernaut government spending. I'm not against government helping people. I'm really not. I think government should. But the way that our government especially has set things up, it's very difficult for the church to meet any kind of needs at all because so many of them are already being met. I'm not saying we don't. I'm just saying now it's more difficult for us. And that's not a bad thing, that there aren't people starving on the streets. If there were, you know that this church would go and meet those needs. We would take food to people. Like Mark Preem is over in Odessa, and there are people that have no access to food, and he's getting food from different places, even free food, and taking it around to people. That is wonderful. That is great. So the first focus is on Christian poor. Second, the focus is on work as a good thing. Let's go to 2 Thessalonians. So I'll remind you that in the Old Testament, that how the way that people provided for the poor was how? To leave part of their field for the poor. And then just like in the book of Ruth, those in poverty had to go out and get their food. Now, I would imagine that there were some people that couldn't do that. There were people that were lame. And in the New Testament, we see all kinds of examples of people that Jesus healed that couldn't do anything but sit there and ask for help because they couldn't work. Now, could they get a job sitting and stonemasoning? I don't know. I don't know any of that. But at least the people in the New Testament took pity on them and healed them or gave them what they needed or whatever. But some people couldn't do that. And so there was an obligation to help the lame and the blind and those who were disabled because they're unable to work. They have needs that they're unable to meet. But the poor, you say, well, I'm poor because my crop failed. Okay. But your legs still work, and so you are able to meet some needs. We will just provide it for you. When we harvest our field, we won't go through the vineyard twice, just once. When we go through the field, when we go through our field, we will leave the corners for you to come and get. If we drop anything, we'll leave it there in the dirt, and you can go through and you can get what you need in order to live. But there was this idea, not that you would sit there and wait for someone to bring it to you, but that you would go out and get it. That was an Old Testament principle. Work is a part of the mandate so man could work. And if there's someone who can't work, then we have an obligation to help those people. So here in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 8, Paul gives himself as an example. He came to stay with the Thessalonians, and he said, you remember that when we were there, we were not chargeable to you. We didn't ask for bread. We didn't ask for food. We didn't ask for money. We didn't ask for anything from you. We were not chargeable. We labored. Again, I'm assuming that Paul probably made tents. Somehow he labored to provide his own needs so that he wouldn't be a burden to them and so that nobody could accuse him of doing it for the money. So he says in verse 8, neither did we eat any man's bread for naught, but wrought with labor and travail night and day that we might not be chargeable to any of you. Not because we have not power, but to make ourselves an ensample to you to follow us. For even, when we were with you, this we commanded you, that if any would not work, neither should he eat. For we hear that there are some which walk among you disorderly, working not at all, but are busybodies. Now, them that are such, we command and exhort by our Lord Jesus Christ, that with quietness they work and eat their own bread and mind their own business. That's the idea, right? Some of these people, and now again, we don't really know why. I just got done with my series in 2 Thessalonians. The best guesses are that people were thinking, oh man, the end times are coming, so why would I work? Like, why would I go to... If you knew that the rapture was Wednesday, what would you like? Oh, I better go shovel my driveway. No. Like, I have more important things to do. If you knew it, right? And these people thought, oh man, Christ is coming back any day. Why work? And they didn't work, and then they were just kind of expecting that the church was going to take care of them. And Paul says, when I was with you, I said, if anybody doesn't work, then they shouldn't eat. Work is a part of the mandate. Work is important. It's good for you to work. You will lose purpose if you don't work. And so he says, you're walking disorderly. You're walking in a way that is outside of how you were arranged to work. And it would say, well, I'm really busy. Yeah, you're busy being a busybody. You're doing nothing. You're active, but you're not doing anything productive. You ought to work and do something. Again, if they would not work, then, verse number 10, there should be no provision for them. There is a command to work. Why? Now, here, why is there a command to work in the New Testament? Ephesians 4:28 tells us, let him that stole steal no more. Okay, that makes sense. Don't steal. But you know what it says instead? Instead of stealing, but rather let him labor, working with his hands the thing which is good. Why? That he may have to give to him that needeth. He says, don't steal. Someone's like, okay, I don't steal. But instead, work. Work? What? Stealing is the opposite of work. Yeah, because you're just trying to get something for free. Okay, I'll work so I can have something. No, you want to work so you can have something so that you can meet the needs of other people. Right? Work is a good thing. And if somebody's like, I refuse to work, again, I'm not saying if you can't work. I'm saying if you refuse to work, then there's a problem there. And in this passage, again, he says, then you have no obligation to meet the needs of that person because they could meet their own needs. Again, it is right to expect people who can work to work. Now, obviously, some people could not, and Jesus healed them, and Paul healed them, and Peter healed them, but the vast majority of people we encounter can work. We're living in a country where you can get a job doing about anything. And I know, I'm not trying to be dismissive like, John Kerry, learn to code. Well, some people are able to go back to school and code, and some people can, but there are all kinds of jobs that almost anybody can do. And work is a good thing. It's good to be productive. And maybe if you're retired, I think it's still a good idea to work. Maybe not for a paycheck, but to find something productive to do with your life. Something that God is working through you. Work, and that's a good thing to do. Some, though, don't work. Now, there are some people that don't work. We've encountered some people who don't work, and this is a big, big thing that's keeping people out of the workforce. They have a disability, and the disability is this: anxiety. I can't work because I get anxious around people. Part of that is maybe some mental health issues. Part of that is learned behavior, where they've been like maybe in video games for too long, isolated. What they mean is, I feel awkward around people, and when I feel awkward around people, that gives me anxiety. Yeah, well, welcome to the club, I think. I mean, we've all felt really anxious around people, and I don't want to be here right now. We've all had that, and some of that is learned behavior. Some of that you can get a coach that can help you with that, but I feel like most job places are willing to work with people. Now, again, I have pity for those kind of people, but we as a church have to decide, what are we going to do about people who say, I don't have a job because I can't work because, again, one lady, because whenever I get a job, I get hives. I get so nervous, I get hives all over, and then I'm sick for a week on my first day of work. It's like, that is tough. What can we do about that? Well, we as a church need to be able to come together. Now, some people, well, here's an idea then, Pastor. What if we had people that have a need? They can do work around the church here. They could shovel some snow. They could vacuum. They could maybe do some work in landscaping or something. We could pay them $15 an hour or whatever, and they could get something then. Well, and in theory, that's a great idea. However, what happens when someone gets hurt on church property doing that thing, intentionally or otherwise? So are we going to have like a whole system of, would you sign this waiver saying that if you get hurt, we have workman's comp, and we have lawsuit insurance as a church. We have all these things, but is that something that we really want to take on? This isn't like an imaginary scenario. It's very real that it could happen. So we have to think about this, and that's why on that application there's that question: do you have a job? And if so, where do you work? I think it says that, and if not, why aren't you working? Okay. So the first focus, and Marlene, I saw your hand. I'll ask you afterward. The first focus is on the Christian poor. The second focus is on work as a good thing. The third focus then is on needs that are other than financial needs. Obviously, there are some times that there are emergencies. So, someone comes and says, I have an emergency right now. Or they say, I have a $280 bill. And we say, well, boy, that's a lot of shoveling snow. It's going to take you 40 hours. And they're like, I need it by 5 o'clock today. Remember we talked about this in the first week? Those in the poverty mindset don't think about a week from now. They don't think about 2 weeks from now. They're thinking about right now. And yeah, maybe they should have come to the church 2 weeks ago to ask for help. But here they are. Maybe they should have come 3 months ago before their electricity was cut off, but they didn't. And so they're here and they're asking for help. And we have to try to discern now, what are we going to do about this? Most people know that they're more likely to get help if there's some kind of crisis. And so try not to be cynical. And it's been a long time since I've had this, but about 5 or 6 years ago, we were doing a lot more with benevolence. And it seems like whenever we help somebody, there was a lot of other calls after that. I don't know how those people found each other or what, but I got to see a pattern in the requests. It always had to do with someone who wasn't from here, so their story couldn't be verified. Someone who had to go to another place like Fargo or the city, somewhere far away. They were from somewhere, and they were trying to get somewhere else. They weren't trying to get to Park Rapids. They were in Park Rapids on their way to somewhere else. And it always had to do with either a child or a grandparent. Can you help me get to Fargo? My grandpa's in the hospital, and he's dying, and I need to see him. Can you help me get to the cities? My son was airlifted. He choked on a peanut M&M, and I need to get down there to see him. And I heard that one a couple times, that very one. Lady, I don't know if two different ladies had two different sons who choked on two different peanuts, M&Ms, and had two different airlifts, or if that was the story. And so I start to ask a little bit, how are you here in Park Rapids? One lady, she was like, I'm like, where are you from? Oh, I'm from somewhere down south. I forget where. What are you doing in Park Rapids? Well, I just heard it was a nice place to be. Okay. Where do you work? Well, I'm going to school in Bemidji. Why didn't you move to Bemidji? You're going to school there. I don't know. I just didn't. But I need gas money to get XYZ. And I honestly couldn't remember. It's been so many years now. I couldn't remember if we helped them or not. So we don't want to be so rigid that we can't help people. No, you have to meet these conditions. But we have to recognize that the help we give is often short-term help. So what about long-term help? Let's recognize that when someone has money, the problem is not always solved. Someone comes in and they have needs, and we give them $250 for their electric bill, but have we solved the problem? What their needs? Have we met their needs? That's what I'm asking. Well, we've met a want that's quite possibly a need, but we haven't actually met their needs. Sometimes people need to address the reasons that they need money. Part of it could be an addiction. It's zapping their money. It's getting them evicted. Now they have a criminal record. It's difficult for them. So maybe we could provide at some point some addiction classes or some group meetings or some mentorship that would help people get off of drugs or alcohol to help them. Sometimes we need to address their skill sets. Those of you who have, you've been around long enough to know which is cheaper, healthy food or junk food. Junk food's, in some ways, cheaper. In some ways, though, if we're talking about convenience foods, they're a lot more expensive. Like, if you go and buy a lasagna right now, Is that more or less, and I guess here I'm talking like outside of my realm of understanding. Is it more or less expensive to go buy a ready-made lasagna than to make it yourself? It's more, the frozen lasagna is more expensive? Yeah. I would say that's true, right? Yeah. So if we could teach someone to cook, that would actually reduce their grocery bill in some ways, and they would be eating healthier, so they wouldn't have the cost of all the healthcare things that they would have, right? If we could meet that need, they could cook for themselves, which gives them purpose, and it gives them a sense of accomplishment, and they can have more money for their grocery bill, for other things, and they can eat healthier. What about people who can't do a budget? We could help someone to look at their money and form a budget, help them do their taxes maybe, help them come up with a plan for, all right, let's talk about your debts, talk about what we can do as a church to help you get debt free. Someone who can't work on their car or fix appliances, someone to teach somebody some home repair. Because I think for some in poverty, they don't even know who to call. And it's like, well, I guess this will just have to be broken. And we'll just have to deal with it. And they have stuff in their house. Again, have you been in the houses of poor people around here? I have. I've been in many of the middle school apartments. I've been in many of the other apartment buildings in town. I've been in some trailers that looked uninhabitable from the inside. And I've seen the way that those in poverty live. And in some ways, I'm like, why would you do this to yourself? And in other ways, I'm like, they don't know any better. We could really help them just with some skill set and some knowledge. What about somebody who's going for a job interview? We could help them get an in with getting a job. What kind of job are you looking for? Let's go and let's talk to them. And even honestly, a manager who has somebody who can say, hey, I'm trying to help this person, I'm trying to vouch for them, that goes a long way, I think, with a manager, because some guy just kind of shows up and he's smelling like weed and he wants a job, and the manager's like, I don't want the hassle of this. I don't want to deal with all this. But you got somebody who comes with you and they've maybe provided a tie and a shirt, and now the guy's ready for a job, and he's got somebody with him. It's like, hey, could you just give him a chance? I'm going to try to vouch for him. I'm working with him, but could you give him a job? Now, all of a sudden, we've been able to give them more than just money. We've been able to give them some skill sets. Sometimes it's giving a little extra of what we have. In Luke chapter 3, verse 11, John the Baptist answered and said, he that hath 2 coats, let him impart to him that hath none. He that hath meat, let him do likewise. If you have a little extra, you can give. Now, again, I don't think I've ever had anybody call the church and ask for food. That number 1 is probably gasoline. Number 2 is electric bills. We have had some asking for propane. We've had some asking for car repairs and some prescriptions, which is a tricky thing, isn't it? We used to have a lot of asking for hotel rooms, but, and I'm sure I've told you this already, we don't do that for 2 reasons. One, ask me afterwards, but we don't do that anymore where we provide hotel rooms. Now, that's a hard thing because sometimes there are people in crisis, they're in a domestic situation, and there is nothing in Park Rapids to help people immediately that night who are in a domestic abuse situation. But sometimes the needs that we're thinking about, like I can provide this, are not always readily available. Maybe if their marriage is in trouble, we can help meet their needs. You know, if a marriage dissolves, there's a huge cost there too, not just in lawyers' fees and whatever, but just in now you have 2 people that are trying to live on their own, and we could do something about, we were invested in marriages anyway. Now again, to stay away from cynicism, I'll just say that often this kind of help is not the kind of help that poor people want or know that they need. And if we offer help, listen, we can help you, but this is the kind of help we can offer. And if they say, no, thank you, I believe biblically we're free to say, then I'm afraid I cannot help you. So we get to pick what kind of help we can give, because we believe that there's a help that is helpful and a help that is not helpful. Again, we have to understand, though, that those in poverty don't think ahead. They need someone to be able to help them. And sometimes, honestly, the best thing we can do is to point them to government agencies. I don't want the kind of help you want. Well, then here's the number of Salvation Army. Here's who you can call. And if we can help you with some other things, we would love to try to be in your life. But what you're asking right now is hard. I think I mentioned this last week. There was a ask for propane, and I only talked to the person because they wanted $300 for propane to fill up their tank. And the only reason I asked is somebody that I knew vouched for them and said, hey, this person really has a need. And, I'm assuming then by this voucher that they were not going to use it for drugs. We don't give cash anyway. We pay the distributor or whatever. And I told the person, we're happy to give it to you. And I gave them the whole plan of salvation. And I said, no, listen, we'd be more than happy to help you in the future if at some point you paid this back when things get back on your feet. If you paid that back, then we'd have that money to be able to help you or somebody else again. And I never even saw the person or heard back from them again. So sometimes the best we can do is to point them to something else. I will say this too, then, personal involvement is always better. One of the things that the government is good at is giving out money because they have so much of it. They're not really good with the personal touch. And that's not a dig as much as it is saying that's not really their job. There's probably a lot of liability swept up in that. And that's honestly just, again, not their job. I remember talking to somebody in the middle school apartments, and she said that her social workers were telling her the benefits that she could get. She got a big inheritance, and they told her, now, if you keep this inheritance, you're going to get less benefits. So we would advise you to spend that money up. So she bought a big log bed. She showed it to me. And she bought a big screen TV because the social workers at social services told her to do it so that she could keep her benefits. And I didn't believe her. I was like, no way. So I went to talk to the head of social services at the time, who's not there anymore. And he said, that's exactly right. He said, unfortunately, those in social services, and I'm not trying to pick on social services, that's just who it was. Those in social services are not here to help people get out of benefits. They're there to tell them how to stay in, how to keep their benefits. So the government is not the solution. I think they have a lot of money, and so it seems like they are. But personal involvement is always best. So someone gets out of jail. So let's say that someone's drunk driving up on highway, up near Bemidji, but not in Bemidji. Because in Beltrami County, they get picked up. They get hauled all the way down to Hubbard County, and here they are. And they sit 30 days. They get out, and it's not like the police is going to give them a ride back to where they were. Here's where I picked you up. Here's where I will drop you off. Your car has been impounded. What do you do? And maybe they have somebody they can call, but if they don't, what can we do? Can we do, as a church, do anything? Yeah, they need some money, but they maybe also need some mentorship. The rate of recidivism is lower when people have somebody who can walk alongside them. Now you can say, because I'll say it too, I have been there for people who have just gotten out of jail and it doesn't work. And you're right. However, it's still our obligation to do what we can to try to meet needs. We could have a ministry of people just getting out. We could put our number out there, and I haven't yet. I haven't, because I really want the backing of the church. And that's why it's too bad that the whole church hasn't heard this, but this series of messages. But we could have a little card that we give to. I give to the jail and say, hey, when someone gets out, if they don't have any means of getting home or whatever, have them call me. Right now, you know where they do? They go to the hospital. And they try to get a room in the hospital for the night because they don't have anywhere else to go. And they're just kind of looking for there's no bus that runs north. What do we do? And I'm not saying we won't be, that it'll be an unsafe situation. I'm just saying, can we as a church meet that need? Is there anything that we can do about that? Someone who's asking for help. It would be good for us, like I said, through that sheet, and sometimes I do this, to interview them to find out what kind of help they need versus what kind of help they want. Because they might be telling you, this is what I need. I need $250 for electricity. And you might be able to say, can we talk to you about the way, can we talk to you about the way that you're spending your money so this doesn't happen again? So that you don't go and ask this person, and do you have people that you owe? Okay, can we talk to you about how to get this? Where are you working? You're only working 20 hours a week. Can we help you get back on your feet? You're having trouble finding daycare. You're having trouble finding a place. There's some things that we can do for people. There's a lot. Honestly, I'm just telling you, it's really messy when you start getting involved. It's really messy. Because you've got a boyfriend and a girlfriend, and they want to find a place that they can move in together. And I'm like, I don't think you should be living together. I don't. So I can't help you with that. I can't help you and your boyfriend find a place to shack up together. But I want to help you at the same time. It's tough. It's messy. But it's not a no. It's not, no, I'm sorry, we can't help you all together. It's just that it takes some digging, and it takes some interviewing, and it takes them finding somebody who cares. Somebody's going to get their text number and text them every once in a while. Hey, how you doing? Hey, do you want to meet? Can we get together? Is there any needs that you have? Rather than people coming to, here's the thing. The people that are the neediest aren't the people that call First Baptist Church and ask for help. Now, I'm glad for everyone who does. And again, every time someone comes in, I give them a gospel tract. If I can, I'll present the gospel to them and help them with money. That's my last point that I'm getting to. But there are opportunities for ministry. It's just hard sometimes to actually delve in and dig into all of that. The government, again, is good at passing out money, but not as good at coaching. We could require classes. Hey, we are able to help you with your needs, but we have a 6-week course that financial whatever, or if you'll meet with this person for 2 hours and let them help you go through your budget, or if you'll come to the church and meet with this person, they're going to talk to you about inventory, about what you can do. And if you'll do that, then we can meet this need, even if it's a big bill. Because now all of a sudden we're getting involved in someone's life. And that might be a pretty big price tag, but it might be the very difference that they need, that their kids, we might be able to pull them out of that, what we talked about, that generational poverty. And again, most people in poverty aren't thinking that far ahead. They're thinking short term. I came here to get my $100 and that's all I need. I want to get it and go because I'm uncomfortable. I feel guilty. I feel terrible about being here. And they just need someone who's going to be kind and loving, and someone who, if they fill out the application, I'm just a friendly face who said, hey, I've heard you have some needs. I'd like to try to help meet those needs and not just do what the government does and hand them a check. And not just say, there's the food shelf, go get it yourself. Something that we can do that's meaningful and Christian to help people. A long-term partnership is much better than the short term. Again, they're already embarrassed. So if they have a partner, it's easier to accept help. I'll just say finally then, the focus has to be on the gospel. We want to be about incorporating the gospel to our help. We are calling people to respond to the gospel first. Now, them getting saved isn't going to solve all their problems. And sometimes if we say, well, if you get saved, we'll be able to give you $1,000, I can see how that could go wrong in so many ways. So I'm not saying that either, am I? I'm saying that, though, that if we just give money, we just give that kind of help, and we never give the gospel, then we're not actually helping people because we're not meeting what? Their greatest need. We know what their need is. The world doesn't know what their need is because they've never been confronted with their soul. Most people don't think about it. So it's important for us to be able to do that. But we need to be able to provide spiritual help with that physical help. We have to be able to invest in gospel work as we're giving the gospel too. What I would like is to be able to, now that I've given you some things to think about, this isn't a program of me. If it's up to me, we're going to keep doing what we're doing. Can you come fill an application? We'll look it over. I will decide yes or no. I'll talk to Mary or Terry about a check. I'll give them the gospel and that'll be it. And we could just do that for people in Park Rapids. Or we can make some real difference in people's lives. Obviously, if there are people in our church, and we have been able to meet the needs of people in our church, if you have a need, if there's somebody that you know of, and you come to me, Zach says, hey, I was talking with this guy, and he has a real need. I think that the church should be able to help him out a little bit. Then then we can do that. That's a lot easier, you vouching for them, than someone coming off the street cold. So I want to talk about this. I want to, create conversations where we as a church can really do something to obey what the Bible says about caring for the poor. Yes, in our church. Yes, outside our church. As a ministry, as a lighthouse, and see if we can do something for our society, which is really crumbling. And the government doesn't have the answers. The church absolutely, absolutely does.